and we're running out of time, but I'll get through these rest of them quicker. Let's see. So 2:11 again. We're going to hit to the end of it. Oops. Run back. Right. When the Job's three friends heard about the adversity that happened to them, each of them came from his home, right? That instantly the idea was to move, and specifically I think the idea is to sacrifice, right? That instantly they realize they should sacrifice, right? Right. So we know that Job was most likely a patriarch, and that his friends were patriarchs as well, right? That these guys were almost definitely in charge of lots of donkeys, lots of oxen, right? That these guys had just a lot of livestock. And I can tell you, we see that Job's wealth is measured in livestock, and I can tell you that ranching and having all these animals, that from experience these past few months, and just being Dad's son, that the more work you do, the more involved you are, the better it is, the easier it is to make money, to make a profit, right? Obviously at that time it wasn't money, it was more livestock, but that there's been a few times where specifically Annie will ask, why don't you have sheep or something like that? And Dad will be like, sheep are more profitable, but it requires so much more work. And so these guys, right, they were almost definitely ranchers, right? They were almost definitely people who had a lot of livestock, and by leaving, they're sacrificing a lot, right? And so I think that with the Newcombs, I know that there's already people helping them with their clothes and other things, right? I'm sure there's tons of other needs, and I'm sure in the days ahead we will get a list of their needs and things that we can help them out, and we can sacrifice that way. We can sacrifice with time and that sort of thing, right? We're going to see some ways that we can sacrifice all over the place, right? We know that this is the biggest way, right? The greatest way, that sacrificing is the greatest way to really love our friends in the time of need, right? We know that Jesus said, greater love has no one than this, that a man lay down his life for his friend, right? That's the ultimate sacrifice, and not that that's always what we should do, is lay down our life, but it's definitely on the table at times, right? So they heard and they came, and then they also coordinated. And this I want to break down into two parts, but I think it's something that often gets overlooked, right? I'm sure that somebody calling, oh, Mom answered that real quick. Anyway, well, obviously I'm sure it's someone calling, but I bet it has something to do with the Newcombs, right? Somebody trying to figure out a way to help, and that's y'all nailing this. I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here, but anyway, coordination is where we're at, right? I want to break it down into two parts, and the first part is, let's look. Now when Job's three friends heard about the adversity that happened to him, each of them came from his home. They met together to go sympathize with him and comfort him, right? The idea being that they organized it, right? And certainly there's this idea that they could be gossiping, but that's not the case, right? What they were doing was coordinating and uniting, right? And so let's talk about organizing, right? Or coordinating, organizing, right? We read this week as well in 1 Corinthians 14, 26 through 40. It just talks about how God is a God of order, right? That we don't necessarily associate God as a God of order quite very often, right? We often associate, other parts, right? We get empathy, right? God as a God of love, but certainly 1 Corinthians 14:33, God is not a God of disorder, but of peace, right? Of 14:40, but everything is to be done decently and in order, right? And so there's certainly, the Church of Corinth, which we're not going to have time to talk about in detail, but the Church of Corinth is struggling with disorganization, dysfunction, right? And we need order, right? And I don't know what that looks like in this situation, or what that looks like, but I do think that just thoughtlessly sacrificing is not the way, right? That there needs to be order, right? And we saw it when we went through Exodus, right? There was dysfunction, and then Moses had to put together a group of leaders, right? We saw, really the Torah shows us that God is a God of order and organization. If there's ever, something that shows organization in the world, it's the Torah, right? So anyway, then there's also the concept of unity, right? And that was definitely talked about and nailed this past Sunday with Mike, and I'm just going to reiterate, I'm not even going to take time to talk about it. I'm just going to read a verse that he read on Sunday, right? When Jesus is praying for us as believers, he says in John 17:21, may they all be one, as you, Father, are in me, and I am in you. May they also be in us, so that the world may believe you sent me, right? The idea that we need to be unified in a similar way as God, as the Trinity, right? And that's just an amazing, amazing concept. If you weren't there on Sunday, I would just suggest scrolling back. You're on the page, just scrolling back and you can watch that. I'm not gonna go into too much detail, don't have that kind of time. And then the bigger thing they did, right? They heard, they came, they coordinated, and then the thing that's most obvious, they showed empathy, right? We get that in 11, right? The end of it. They met together to go and sympathize with him and comfort him. When they looked from a distance, they could barely recognize him. They wept aloud, and each man tore his robe and threw dust into the air and on his head, right? This concept that the Romans rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep, right? That this is in the time where you do the sackcloth and ashes, right? That you tear your robe, right? That even though they lived a good distance away, right? And they probably didn't know these children of Job, right? They probably didn't understand that they didn't understand all that Job has lost if they were living that far away, but yet they still wept. And they still had empathy. And we could talk a lot about this. And from a human perspective, you see over and over again the concept of empathy growing in importance, right? That, for ages past, that your physical abilities were the most important, and then IQ was the most important to be successful, right? But now it's growing to where empathy is a bigger and bigger predictor of success. And But I don't think that's, I mean, obviously the being successful in the eyes of the world is not relevant, but we definitely need to weep with those who weep and that sort of thing. But I do have a counterpoint here, and this is something I just, whenever I was going through it, I thought of, so Lazarus dies and all these people are crying, and Jesus certainly could have wept with those who were weeping, right? But that's not what he did. He enacted change. And I think it's not for us, if you're a Trump fan or a Biden fan and you see the polls and you think that your guy's going to lose, it's not for you to cry because the polls are bad, or, you know, that's a bad example. A better example is somebody right now in